As the fourth anniversary of the war between Russia and Ukraine approaches, the trajectory of the conflict has taken an unexpected turn. In February 2022, Vladimir Putin dreamed of subjugating Ukraine in a matter of days. But today, the Russian army has lost the vast majority of its most important military assets, tanks. The Russian Federation's tank losses are reaching record levels. While the Kyiv government is not talking about hundreds of tanks lost, but numbers in the tens of thousands, Russia's armored forces, which it boasted about in previous years, are literally melting away. Although precise figures are hard to come by, the statistics provide some insight into the toll of fierce fighting in the three-year war. Since 2022, the Ukrainian armed forces have destroyed 10,000 Russian tanks and 77 heavy flamethrower systems. But why has Russia lost so many tanks and manpower? The Ukrainian armed forces have adopted a highly professional and systematic approach against Russian tanks in the three-year war. The use of modern anti-tank missiles, artillery-coordinated attacks, and especially tactics using unmanned aerial vehicles have clearly exposed the vulnerabilities of Russian armor. Many analyses have emphasized that Russian troops neglected coordination when launching tanks in massed attacks, and that low morale and unplanned operations led to dramatic tank losses. Even though the goal of a rapid offensive in early 2022 has been replaced by a defensive retreat among the hard-hit Russian troops, Putin's administration has chosen to continuously deploy new armored units. But this only added to the existing losses. In particular, the emphasis on the development of unmanned systems allowed Ukrainian attack drones to effectively destroy Russian equipment from considerable distances. Thus, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation, the Ukrainian defense forces have neutralized about 10,000 tanks and 77 heavy flamethrower systems of the Russian aggressor. As Russian tank stocks are depleted, increasingly targeted by Ukrainian drones, Russia has turned to Cold War inventory to maintain the flow of tanks to the Ukrainian battlefield. Tanks have been used in wars around the world for more than a century. But their use in the Ukrainian conflict has shown how new tools such as drones could potentially limit their usefulness. Russia has reportedly lost thousands of tanks during the invasion, but continues to send these heavy war machines to the front lines despite their apparent weaknesses. In this environment, Putin can advance his war plans even with thousands of tanks at stake, not to mention the lives of Russian troops sent to the front lines in Ukraine. Military analysts say the country is content to absorb these losses in line with the larger goals set by President Vladimir Putin, who has adopted a quantity over quality approach. Experts also note that earlier in Russia's war effort, there were significant failures in the organization and planning of tank attacks, as well as poor training, low morale, and breaks in the chain of command. The most experienced tank crews committed themselves to the fight only a few weeks into the full-scale war, leaving behind new recruits with few instructors to train them. Whatever happens, it seems that for Russia, the loss of thousands of tanks and crews is an accepted cost of Putin's war in Ukraine. Along these lines, analysts say that Russia's dependence on these old machines means that the quality of the tanks sent to Ukraine has declined over time. There is no doubt that Russian heavy armor losses in Ukraine are enormous. Moreover, Russia's industrial capacity and how quickly and how well Moscow will be able to compensate for its combat losses are also in question. Despite the huge losses, the Russian army still remains on Ukrainian territory. But with its worn-out equipment and insufficient troops and equipment, it is unable to conduct effective operations against Ukrainian fighters. While Russia's claims of 10,000 tanks as an incredible number of casualties may seem exaggerated at first, the Ukrainian side often backs it up with videos, satellite images, or photos of debris on the front line. Analysts doubt the accuracy of this number, but the general consensus is that Russia's losses are mind-boggling. To compensate for the mounting losses, the Russian military is fielding older models of Cold War-era tanks such as the T-62. The loss of new generation tanks such as the T-72B3 or T-90A is also high, and it is known that some of these models have been captured by Ukraine and put into service with the Ukrainian army. The simultaneous loss of both modern and older tanks weakens the Kremlin's chances of rapidly replenishing its own tank inventory. The T-90A tank, which made a relatively strong impression in the field at the beginning of the war, seems to have lost its showcase face. The combination of drone strikes, advanced anti-tank missiles such as the Javelin, and poor logistical organization has resulted in the T-90As going from being the most prominent elite armored vehicles to frequently being on the list of destroyed or abandoned vehicles. Videos released by Ukraine clearly show that T-90As are unable to withstand explosive-laden drones or core warfare weapons. These tanks, which are said to have the Shtora 1 active protection system, are helpless in the face of unpreventable attacks. Although the Russian military explains the situation as, "These losses are acceptable for the sake of our military objectives," the lack of coordination and training in the military administration, the inexperience of tank crews on the front line, and the inadequacy of cooperative tactics shorten the life of the tanks. In short, the performance of Russian tanks in Ukraine has let Putin down. All this reflects the fact that the Russian army continues to fight the war, albeit at the risk of huge tank losses. However, the losses are even more striking not only in terms of armored vehicles, but also in terms of military personnel. Ukrainian sources claim that more than 840,000 Russian military personnel have been killed, wounded, or captured. Although these figures are difficult to verify, leading Western intelligence agencies have also published reports confirming Russia's manpower shortages. This picture shows that Putin's plan to win comes at a very heavy price in reality. The fact that the Russian army suffered more than 90,000 casualties in December 2024 and January 2025 shows how attritional the fighting has been. With an average of 1,556 casualties per day, including those killed, wounded, captured, and missing, the figures show that Russian leaders continue to sacrifice their lives for the sake of their strategic objectives. Ukraine, on the other hand, is also suffering its own casualties. Its progress on the front line is slowing at times, but with Western armed support, it is sticking to its strategy of exhausting the enemy at its source. The Russian army's losses in tanks and armored vehicles reinforce the Kyiv government's goal of crippling Russia's traditional ground forces. At the same time, the perception that the Russian economy is in shambles serves to maintain Western support. This picture undermines any hope for a ceasefire or peace at this stage, as the parties are far from achieving their seemingly unattainable goals. With each new loss, the Russian army is trying to answer the question, was the loss of so many tanks and soldiers wasted? While Ukraine is raising the rhetoric that, with the help of more weapons, we will completely repel the Russian occupation. Russia's losses do not stop there. The war has depleted Putin's most robust resources. Putin's war machine is under threat. Tensions are rising in the Russian Federation due to economic problems. Nearly 3 years into Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the aggressor's economy is in critical condition. The logistical resources and economic infrastructure that sustain the Kremlin's war machine are crumbling, despite the recent talk of nuclear weapons. Domestically, inflation is rising. There is a known labor shortage, and the assets of the state-owned National Welfare Fund are rapidly eroding. Oil and gas revenues are becoming increasingly difficult to replace, and Russia's exports are suffering under Western sanctions, disrupting the supply of technology and spare parts. Military expenditures are growing, while production capacity is partially stifled by worn-out personnel, limited investment, and trade barriers. While the Kremlin is pushing for more protectionist measures and high interest rate policies, there are those inside the country who believe that the financial system is heading for collapse. When asked by journalists, is Russia running out of money? Top oligarchs in business circles responded, at this rate soon, yes. In the end, the situation Putin is facing, with tank casualties estimated in the tens of thousands and military casualties in the hundreds of thousands, is testing Russia's industrial and social resources. If he prolongs the war, the Russian leader risks economic collapse. If he backs down, he risks domestic political fallout from the image of weakness. This dilemma puts Russia in an extremely dangerous position. When the huge hulls of tanks were easy targets for drones and modern anti-tank missiles, the Moscow front dreamed of crushing Ukraine with total quantity. Today, both quantity and quality are fast running out. Additional foreign support, such as North Korean troops, does not change the picture radically. The Russian economy is struggling. Its exclusion from world markets and the wave of domestic inflation are forcing the Kremlin to take extreme measures. But these measures are creating new problems. The year is 2025, and Russia's painful balance sheet, which includes the loss of tens of thousands of tanks, undermines Putin's historic victory narrative. All this has shattered the old myth of Russia's feared armored army. Even if the war ends, these losses are not easy to make up. Russia could struggle for decades to repair this armored deficit. A never-ending line of conflict has replaced the perception of great power with the debate of, are there enough resources to continue the war? At this point, what will Putin do now is a question that could shape the future of not only Russia, but also the region and the world. For now, there is no foreseeable glimmer of peace, and the wreckage of the tanks and the economic turmoil are deepening the Russian leader's nightmare. As a result of all these developments, there is a feeling in the Russian Federation that economic difficulties could end the conflict this year. So what do you think about this issue? We will be glad if you specify in the comments. Thank you for watching us. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like to support us.